2 hours, 5 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. John grabbed my shoulders and screamed into my face. "Dave, are you in there? It's me, John. I am your friend. Can you understand me?" "Why are you talking like that?" I looked inside the caddy. John had come alone. "Where's Amy?" "I don't know. Outside town, I think." "Oh, thank God." "Or not. I actually don't know." Owen strode up and kicked aside a smoldering skull. He raised the pistol. John raised his shotgun. Their eyes met. John said, "Owen, what the hell are you doing here?" "You are one crazy son of a bitch, John." To me, John said, "Is he infected?" "I don't think so." Owen said, "Ain't none of us infected." I said, "We don't know that." John said, "Well, whatever. Everybody needs to get the hell out of here. By lunchtime, this is all going to be a crater. Did you hear the announcement out there, Owen?" I said, "Wait, do you two know each other?" "Yeah, remember I said I was doing setup for him? This is DJ O Funk." To Owen, he said, "Hell, I thought you'd be out of here on Daryl's farm riding this thing out." "I was. Went into town on a beer run and got scooped up by the feds. I punched one of those guys in the spacesuits, and I guess they took that as a sign of infection." I noticed the rest of the inmates were staring at us, shell-shocked, as we held this conversation next to the crashed caddy and among the scattered pile of smoking human remains. It finally occurred to me to turn my eyes up to the circling drone, wondering if they were zeroing in on our skulls right now. I had a vague thought that we should run for cover, but the entrance to the hospital was 100 feet away. It'd be a nice, leisurely couple of shots for some guy sitting at a console out in the desert. We could duck in the car, but the drone was also equipped with the kind of rockets that could turn it into 2 tons of burning steel confetti. Actually, why hasn't he shot us already? Dr. Marconi walked up and John glanced at him. "Doc, you been here the whole time?" "John, I would ask you what you are doing, but I fear you would actually tell me." "I'm just here to get Dave. Now we're going to get in my caddy, and I'm going to drive a caddy-shaped hole in that fence over there. The rest of you can walk right out behind us. Once out, you'll owe me a case of beer. Each of you." Owen said, "You didn't see the big fucking guns lined up outside? They'll turn you into 2 chunks in 2 seconds. "I didn't see any big fucking guns. I saw a bunch of little fucking guns. I don't think they were anticipating a Cadillac driving zombies. But either way, you need to find a way out of here before they bomb the place." John ducked into the caddy and said, "Oh, Owen, did paychecks go out last week before all this happened?" Owen glanced at me, then John, and said, "How the fuck did you two ever find each other?" To me, John asked, "You coming?" I took to the passenger seat. The caddy seemed to be listing somewhat, and steam was oozing from under the hood, but the engine was still running, so that was good. John said, "Marconi, there's room in the back seat." Marconi leaned in and said, "I assume your plan didn't progress beyond this exact moment." "I try to take it one step at a time." Marconi shifted his eyes to me and said, "Remember what I said?" "Yeah, the Babylon Protocol." He started to correct me, but instead said, "There's a way to beat it. But with God as my witness, I do not know how any of us will get the chance. Just tell me what we need to do." "Think it through. Think about the symbols we rally around. Think about what binds people together. Just fucking tell me." "I think you already know, David. There needs to be a sacrifice." "A sacrifice? Why?" "Think it through." "What, like somebody has to die?" "One of us." Marconi backed away and said, "Go, before the drone operators finally make sense of what they're seeing and open fire." We buckled our seatbelts. John threw the caddy into reverse. He backed up, rolling through the fire pit, knocking aside a wheelchair. He cranked the wheel and got the caddy pointed behind the building, not far from the strip of woods John and I had escaped through on that first night, before there was a big-ass fence there. The crowd of inmates in front of us split like the Red Sea. John floored it. The back tires dug down into the mud. We launched forward, barreling towards a section of fence bearing the words, "Flame Grilled Friday" at Cunt Tree Kitchen. I braced my hands against the dashboard and heard myself screaming. The fence never stood a chance. The hood bashed through the first layer, whipping down the layer of plastic sheeting. The fencing was still raking its way around the rear windshield when we hit the second layer of fence, smashing a wooden pole in two, ripping through the chain link. The boundary between quarantine and the outside world was pierced once and for all, and then, crash! With the cataclysmic sound of metal and plastic splattering against concrete, we hit the vehicle barrier both of us had forgotten about until that moment. The King Kong fist of inertia punched me in the back. My last memory before I blacked out was the filthy windshield about 1 inch from my face, and the seatbelt then yanking me roughly back. When I came to, the hood was crumpled up in front of me and John was shaking me, saying, "Get down!" Since I had temporarily forgotten where we even were, I also had forgotten what exactly I was ducking away from. I groggily turned to look outside of the driver's side window and saw a hulking camo-painted vehicle with no driver. I had no problem figuring out what it was. I saw a turret on top of it, light glinting off of a camera lens, and on either side of the lens were two massive gun barrels. The machine whirred, and the barrels spun on me. The movement wasn't robotic at all, but quick and smooth and purposeful. I froze, mesmerized, staring into the twin black holes, and then chose that moment to wonder what Marconi was talking about when he was going on about sacrifice. 8 hours earlier. Bing, bing, bing. The RV's door-open chime wafted through the frozen night. It was the soundtrack of Amy's last moments. The thing in front of her breathed, and its breath smelled of exotic dead meat. It sniffed her. A realization washed over her in that cold, dark space. This was how virtually all living things born on Earth have died, with teeth tearing through their muscle and bones. We humans have computers and soap and houses, but it doesn't change the fact that everything that walks in is nothing but food for something else. A tongue licked her forehead. Amy instinctively threw up her hand to ward off her attacker and grabbed a handful of fur. Amy opened her eyes, and in the darkness found Molly staring back at her. Molly sniffed her again, turned, inspected the Pop-Tarts on the floor among the broken glass, then trotted over to the side door of the RV, staring at Amy and wagging her tail. Dog language for, "I need you to open this door for me because I do not possess hands." Strangely, that got Amy's legs moving again. Molly needed to go out. Amy had responded to that canine nonverbal cue 1,000 times. She moved quickly to the door, steeled herself, and pushed it open. Molly jumped into the night, into the still air that minutes ago had carried dying screams and the visceral crack of gunfire, into the night where teeth and mindless appetites waited, digesting the entrails of boys she'd been laughing and joking with an hour before. "Stop freaking yourself out and move." Molly returned, looking at Amy expectantly. Amy stepped into the night air, crouching low, keeping her eyes focused on Molly to keep the terror at bay. The dog was not afraid. Amy got ready to run, trying to decide which direction to go. She looked at Molly as if hoping for a suggestion. Molly made a beeline for the basement window. No. Molly jumped over 2 piles of guts that used to be Josh and Donnie and disappeared into the cafeteria Amy had seen on the grainy camera. No. From below, Molly barked. Amy decided that dying out here, in the yard, in the open air, was somehow better than dying down in that dark basement. Molly barked again, but this time it was followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps behind her, somewhere in the night. A lot of them. Something was out here. Down there in the room, Molly was still alive and unharmed. Still, Amy half decided to just go running off into the night. But to where? She got down on hands and knees and crawled through glass and what was slimy and sticky with blood and other bodily discharges that were never meant to leave the confines of their organs. Her knees squished through the spilled entrails until she awkwardly climbed/fell through the window. Amy was blind in the darkness. The lantern was gone. The flashlight was gone. Molly was immediately at her side. Amy reached down to touch her, then grabbed her collar. Molly pulled her along, Amy using her as a seeing eye dog. Amy kicked a corpse and stumbled, catching herself via the pure desperation to not have to crawl through any more guts. Molly led her out of the room, into the hallway, and Amy tried to pull her away from the direction of the stairwell and the maintenance room down there that she knew was now a mass grave. Molly would not budge, pulling the other way, heading for the stairs. No. Amy didn't care what Molly had in mind. She wasn't going down into that basement. Not now, not ever, not for $1 million, not if her life depended on it. Amy pulled one way. Molly planted her feet and pulled the other. Fine. Amy let go and charged off into the direction of darkness of the hall, toward whatever lay at the opposite end from the stairs and the twitching, writhing tomb she knew lay below. She threw her hand in front of her, walking blind, and eventually found a metal door just like the one she was running from. A locked door. She ran her hand along the handle and deadbolt, hoping to find a lever, but instead finding a keyhole, one requiring a key she did not have. Clawed feet scratched up the floor tiles behind her, Molly coming back to say, "See?" Amy didn't move. She shivered. Her pants were wet. Her fingers were sticky with other people's blood. Molly barked. Amy grabbed her collar and allowed herself to be led down the hallway. They reached the end, and the stairs. Down they went. They emerged onto the cell block, and there was the stench of sewage and gunpowder, and there were the doors, and the scratching noises behind the doors. Amy blocked it all out. Molly pulled her along, and Amy knew where they were going. They reached the maintenance door. In the darkness, Amy ran her hand over it and felt puckered bullet holes. She closed her eyes, let out a breath, and said a silent prayer. She pushed the door open. What lay beyond the door was hell. Smoke filled the room, wafting between the rusting pipes and ducts that made the big room look like it was being attacked by a giant robot octopus. It stank like fireworks and burned cloth and scorched meat. A single tiny white shaft of light stabbed up from the center of the floor from a dropped flashlight, illuminated just enough of the nightmare so that Amy would be seeing it for the rest of her life. Dead, open eyes staring up at the ceiling, open mouths, twitching fingers, all of the bodies wearing the same solid color. She felt her stomach turn. Molly pulled free and stepped across corpses, trotting past the tiny shafts of light, continuing into the shadows beyond. She stopped at the opposite wall, looked back at Amy, and wagged her tail. Amy focused on the light. She was determined to block out everything else from this nightmarish place. If she could just make it there, then she'd have a flashlight, and everything would be a bit better. She carefully stepped over limbs and squishy things and explored with her toes to find the solid floor in between. 1 step, 2, 3. Eventually, she got close enough to grab the flashlight, trying to block out the fact that it was curled in 3 dead fingers. She plucked out the light and made her way toward Molly. The smoke was getting to her now, toxic, stinging fumes that burned her eyes. There was a hole in the wall. Cinder blocks had been smashed and knocked aside. This was where the monsters had tunneled into the room. She shined the light inside and found that wasn't quite right. The tunnel had already been there. It was made of brick and looked like the old-fashioned sewers they had under European cities. Old rusty pipes and stuff. Do the zombies live down here? Under the town? Molly pushed past Amy, jumped and scrambled up into the tunnel. "Molly, wait!" It was barely more than a whisper. The tunnel was crawling with bugs and dripping with muddy water, but that wasn't the worst of what she knew lurked in there. Molly scampered into the darkness, the scratches of her claws disappearing into God knew where. "Molly!" Amy shined the flashlight down the tunnel and saw 2 eyes reflecting back at her. Molly had stopped and looked back at her, but stayed where she was. No. No, 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 no. Amy climbed into the tunnel, realizing it wasn't tall enough for her to crouch. She would have to crawl, on her hands and knees, over the bricks. She started, realizing the flashlight was next to useless in her right hand, the beam whipping around crazily as she edged forward. She briefly thought about sticking the flashlight in her mouth, but pictured the dead hand that had been clutching it, and decided no way. She pressed on. Amy crawled and crawled and crawled. The brick ate up her knees and the stump of her left hand, and the knuckles of her right that were trying to simultaneously clutch the flashlight and act as her front paw. Molly had taken off, her claws echoing down the tunnel until not even the echoes could be heard, and Amy wondered how long this tunnel could possibly be. She crawled. Pain flared up each time a bony kneecap struck brick, grinding away at the paper-thin skin between the bone and the denim of her jeans. It seemed like she had crawled for miles and hours. Water dripped in her hair and on her back. She pushed through spider webs. She squished bugs under her hand. She thought she saw rats scurry off at the side of the flashlight beam. She had to stop and rest. She couldn't take the agony in her knees and fingers. The crawling was pulling and twisting at muscles she hadn't used since she had learned to walk. She stopped, pulled up her knees, and leaned up against the rusty pipes. She shined the light back the way she came. She could barely see the entrance to the tunnel. She shined it ahead of her. No end in sight. Her knees were wet and dark. Blood. She was turning her kneecaps into a hamburger. A cockroach crawled across her lap and she swatted it away. Suddenly, the thought struck her, and in that moment, in that place, she believed it fully. She had died back in the RV, and now was in hell. This is what hell was. A cramped, dark, cold tunnel that you crawled through forever and ever, grinding away the skin and muscle and bone of your hands, and then your arms, and then your legs. Endless brick that chewed away your body until you were just a helpless lump for the insects and rats to come feed on, forever. She heard a noise. Behind her, from the direction of the room full of dead. Something was coming. That got her moving again. She crawled faster than before, shutting out the pain, hoping that whatever was pursuing her was as poorly designed for crawling as she was. Time stood still, All that existed was the bricks and the darkness and the chilled breaths tearing in and out of her lungs. Scuffling over bricks from behind her. No way to tell how far behind. She tried to go faster, but she was crawling, and fast crawling was slower than slow walking, and as she inched slowly along the tunnel, she became sure this was a nightmare. The classic nightmare everyone is being chased about in the dark and you try to run but you can't. Suddenly, there was Molly, ahead to her left. Molly barked. There was an intersection in the tunnel where you could continue straight or turn left. Molly wanted to take the turn and Amy was in no position to argue. A few feet into the turn, the tunnel came to a dead end. It was blocked by wood, ancient and covered in mildew. Molly scratched at it. Amy crawled up and pushed Molly out of the way. She sat back on her butt and kicked the wooden barrier as hard as she could. It didn't break, but it bounced and cracked. She pounded it again, and again. Her pursuer got closer, slithering and slapping at the bricks. She heard it breathing. It would round the corner at any moment. She screamed like a karate master, lashing out with her exhausted legs. Her muddy tennis shoes cracking against the board. And then there was no board. It flew away in one piece, slapping against a tile floor somewhere beyond. Amy scrambled out, climbed to her feet, and immediately fell over, the muscles in her thighs spasming and seizing from the crawl that seemed to have lasted weeks. She forced her way up and swept the flashlight around the room. Next to the tunnel exit she had crawled through was a vending machine, of all things, full of bags of chips and cookies and candy bars. On the other side of it was about 3 feet of space between it and the wall. She went around, put her back to the machine and her feet on the wall, and pushed. It tipped over and landed on its side with a crash that sounded like a building being demolished. It didn't block the tunnel entirely, but it blocked most of it. She got back to her feet and picked up the flashlight. There was one door out of the room. She was sure it would be locked, so sure, but it wasn't. When she pulled it open, she was bathed in light. And just like that, she was suddenly in a spacious, well-lit office. There were a dozen computer workstations around the room. The computers were new. The desks were ancient. The place was empty but looked like it had been vacated just minutes before. There were half-full cups of coffee sitting around. One chair still had a winter coat draped over the back. A manila folder had been dropped on the floor, spilling printed forms where it landed. A box of donuts had been knocked onto the floor nearby. Everybody had left in a hurry. Amy turned back to the door she had just entered and listened intently. Nothing from the other side. She checked it to make sure Molly was in the room with her, then locked the deadbolt. She stood there a few minutes more, listening for the sound of someone or something struggling to push over the vending machine. She heard only her pounding heart. Had she really even heard anything in the tunnel? Or was she running from her own echoes? Or Raccoon? Amy turned her attention back to the room. It was warmer in here, but not room warm. She did a loop around the room and found a pair of kerosene space heaters that somebody had remembered to turn off when they evacuated. She turned them back on, felt the warm air waft up at her, and she just stood there and shivered and wished she had a change of clothes. She smelled like sweat and mold and pee. There were 2 doors leading out of the room. She inspected one and found it was locked from the inside, and she decided to leave it that way. The other led to a tiny bathroom that she was shocked to find had running water. She ducked inside and spent several minutes going about the completely unnecessary, yet, in that moment, incredibly important task of cleaning herself up. There was a pump with antibacterial soap on the sink, and she pulled down her pants and scrubbed the raw skin on her knees. She cleaned her hand and her wrist and her glasses and even got her hair down vaguely into hair shape. She got to where she recognized the face in the medicine cabinet mirror again. It helped. She emerged from the bathroom and out loud asked Molly, "So, where are we?" But that wasn't hard to figure out, was it? She drew a map in her head of the building and the tunnel thing that ran south toward the hospital. She had taken a left turn that would put her in the basement of that smaller building behind the asylum. This would have been the administration building, with all the offices and stuff. Amy glanced around at the computer workstations and suddenly had a revelation that made her feel like Neo in the Matrix, the first time he realized he gained the power to stop bullets. This was the nerve center of the quarantine, before the government abandoned it, and they left their computers behind. Figuring out which workstation she wanted was an easy choice. There was one that had 3 monitors attached to it. She held her breath and hit the power button. It came up, and she wondered how much electricity she had. The room had to have been running off of a generator, but the guys in charge of putting gas in it or whatever were gone. There was nothing to do for it but to work fast. The system booted, and a network password box came up. At this point, the question was how many passwords did the system require? There was a big difference between getting through 1 password and getting through 3. Getting through 3 would be much easier. She was, after all, at the workstation. She wasn't trying to break in remotely, which she couldn't do, but she knew people who could. And in the world of computer security, there's a threshold of just how many passwords a human can remember. Give them 1, and they're fine. 2, they're probably still okay. But give them 3, say 1 for the workstation, another for the network, and a third for whatever application they use, and they're going to have to start writing them down. She started opening creaky desk drawers and found the big one in the middle contained nothing but a box of ballpoint pens and a single post-it note with a list of nonsense words and characters. The first would be the username. The rest would be passwords. And just like that, she was in. She tried to make sense of what programs they had on their desktop, then noticed something that made her yelp with joy. This computer has internet access. Holy crap. She didn't even know where to start. She nervously checked both of the locked doors. Still no sounds from the other side, and settled in at the workstation. The first task, she decided, would be to get a sense of the layout of the system, or what exactly she had available to her. She found what they were using for email, and saw tons and tons of messages in the inbox with attachments, status reports, and equipment requests, and lots of other standardized forms, bureaucratic spam. There were also long email exchanges about sound reports and experiment results about frequencies and modulation and terms she had never heard before, like infrasound. The staff were sending audio clips back and forth, and huge walls of analytical text referring to them full of technical gibberish. She'd have to set all that aside for now. She could spend weeks trying to get through it all. She found a program that, when she clicked on it, took over all 3 screens, filling them with banks of various camera feeds. Absolutely nothing was going on in most of them. You wouldn't know they were live if not for the occasional bit of trash that would blow into view, but they were clearly of the exterior of the hospital quarantine. She got out of that and found a separate application that gave her a full aerial view of the hospital grounds, rotating slowly just like the gun camera video Josh had shown her earlier. She was going to hit escape, to back out of it, but suddenly had the irrational fear that if she hit the wrong key, she'd see a missile come flying out of the bottom of the screen and blow everybody up. After a little more snooping, she found out that the aerial drone was actually controlled elsewhere, which made sense. You wouldn't control something like that from a keyboard. You'd want a control stick and all that. She was watching the feed as a spectator. David. She saw him, because the camera's view swung around and focused on him. She had no control over that. Whoever was operating the drone, wherever they were, had done it. The view blinked and zoomed in, then blinked and zoomed in again. It was David, plain as day, in a standoff with a big guy who looked really mad. They were surrounded by a crowd, next to the huge bonfire Josh had said was some ceremonial thing, and no matter how she looked at it, it really did look like skulls and bones in there. There was radio chatter going back and forth in the video feed, but it was faint, and Amy couldn't make it out word for word. What she was able to gather was that the guy flying the drone was asking for permission to fire from a superior, and then Amy realized that she wasn't just watching this through a camera, but a gun camera, and that gun was pointing right at David. "No, don't shoot," she said, stupidly at the computer monitor. She had to have some ability to contact them, right? There were landline phones here, and she would say, what, that she was a random girl who sneaked into the Reaper command center, and that she didn't want them to shoot her zombie boyfriend? All that would do would alert them to the fact that they had an unauthorized person on their network, and that they needed to remotely shut down everything. On the video feed, the big guy raised a gun, pointing it right at David. The camera view shifted slightly, putting the big guy in the crosshairs. "Yes, shoot that guy!" They didn't. She picked up enough of the radio chatter to get that the drone pilot, who she gathered went by the code name Guardian, had been told to stand by and await further orders. Several excruciating minutes later, David was hauled away and taken inside the hospital building, and the camera view zoomed back out so that it could see the whole yard and, presumably, any zombies who tried to make a run for the fence. The next most likely one to make a run for the fence, however, was David, if she knew him at all. And David was not a zombie. This was not wishful thinking on her part. When David was talking to the big gun guy, he was gesturing and conversing exactly the way David had the last time she had talked to him. David was no more a zombie than he had been 2 weeks ago, and Amy had faith that the drone operator in fact did not know that. He had been sold the same BS that Josh believed, about murderous infected non-humans. Those things did exist. Amy just watched them eat the crew she had ridden down here with. One could burst in that tunnel at any moment, but the people inside that fence were people, and the military was about to bomb them all. In the end, it took Amy an hour to make the connection. As a hacker, she was a novice, but she knew that by far the most effective way into any system was what hackers called social engineering. The biggest weakness in any network is the human beings. It doesn't matter how many firewalls or passwords you set up. In the end, the system was manned by people. Lazy, busy, harried people who, when all was said and done, would take the path of least resistance. Figuring out where the drone pilot was operating from was easy. A Google search told her the unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, pilots operated from only one location, Creech Air Force Base, just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Next, she went sifting through the email system to see if she could somehow get so lucky as to find emails from drone pilot dude at creechairforcebase.mil, but there was no such luck. What she did find was a series of emails flying back and forth from the day before, with various people clarifying the, quote, ROE, which she figured was rules of engagement with the, quote, Zulus in the quarantine. As apparently the drone had shot a guy who was attempting to climb the fence, and Amy gathered from reading 50 or so emails that they were supposed to wait until somebody actually got over the first fence before shooting. Somewhere buried in all these forms, she found an eyes-only document that had been sent to the guy who manned this workstation. Some kind of after-action report on the incident that named the drone operator, a Captain Shane McInnes. This was part of an email thread that bounced back and forth between people with Reaper email addresses. The issue was the kid who had been shot, a 22-year-old male they were referring to only as Patient 2027. She sifted through a bundle of scanned eyes-only reports until she found some kind of admission for the form they were using for the quarantine. Everything was expressed in jargon and acronyms, but Amy was able to piece together that the kid who had been held only because he was found in proximity to somebody else who was infected. The kid had killed that person with a baseball bat, but the relevant part of the report on the kid himself were these 5 words that ended the admission form: no signs of infection detected. Patient 2027 was not a zombie. He was just a kid, and now he was dead. One thing became clear when following the chain of emails on the subject. That particular fact had not been shared outside of a very small group of people in Reaper. Amy looked at the clock. It was now 4 a.m., which would be 2 in the morning Nevada time. The shooting happened at 3 p.m. yesterday. Obviously, it wasn't the same guy manning the drone all that time. They worked some kind of regular shifts? If so, that meant Captain McInnes would be back behind the stick in the morning. It really didn't matter either way. That name was all she had. Alright, simple start. Did Captain Shane McInnes have a Facebook page? She searched. Yes, he did. Set to private, which made sense for a guy in that line of work. She could break into that. Facebook's password reset request form was easy to fool, but she wasn't sure that he'd get her what she wanted. Back to Google. She looked up the schools around where the Air Force Base was located and searched for anything on Google with the names of the schools and McInnes in the same article. Boom. Nevaeh McInnes, point guard on the middle school basketball team. Want to bet that's Captain McInnes' daughter? 13 years old. Amy knew she'd have a Facebook page. 10 seconds later, it was up on her screen. She had left everything public, her pics, including shots of her on screen, including shots of her posing with Dad in a dress uniform, her friends list, there was Dad, listed under family. Nevaeh had 132 Facebook friends. Amy sent her a friend request, wondering what time Nevaeh would wake up in the morning and check it. But Nevaeh, apparently a night owl, because even at 2 in the morning her time, she was up to immediately accept a friend request from a total stranger 10 years older than her. Teenagers. 5 minutes later, Amy was chatting with Nevaeh McInnes and realizing this was going to have to be handled with some delicacy. Who is this? Oh, sorry. The following is a conversation between Nevaeh McInnes and Amy Sullivan. Who is this? Hi, Nevaeh. This is going to sound really weird, but this is kind of an emergency and we don't have much time. Nevaeh. Not Nevaeh. Oh, sorry. It's heaven spelled backward. Right. It's very pretty. I can't sleep. Chatting with my friend in Taiwan. Anyway, this isn't a scam or anything. I'm not going to ask you for any money or account numbers, okay? Okay. And no naked pictures or anything like that. I have a friend named Taylor. She's only a year older than me, and this guy emailed her and offered her a modeling contract. Then her mom drove her all the way to LA to have pictures taken. And do you know what happened to them? Nevaeh, this is really important. I'm in Undisclosed right now. Do you know what that means? OMG, are you a zombie? No, that's kind of the point. Oh wow, don't tell anybody, but my dad is in the Air Force and he flies a robot plane shooting zombies. I know, that's why I contacted you. I'm here on the ground and so is my boyfriend, and we're not zombies, but your dad doesn't know that. He's in bed. Okay, is he gonna fly the robot tomorrow? He's tired all the time. I think so. Nevaeh, I'm really scared. We're all scared down here, because I think they're going to shoot all of us. They won't do that. I need you to make sure they don't. I need you to talk to your dad. I can't talk to him about his work. He's not allowed to talk about it. And he gets mad. And he gets quiet. He's tired all the time. Then you have to let me talk to him. He's in bed. I just need his email address. There was a long, long pause without a response. This was the point where any caution young Nevaeh had developed about strangers on the internet should have triggered her alarm bells. Amy tried to picture the girl on the other end, almost 2,000 miles away. She imagined her simply closing her laptop and curling up in bed. Then she imagined her going into her father's room and trying to wake him up. Then she imagined her calling the police. Finally, the chat window blinked to life again, and an email address appeared. It was as simple as pulling up the email that had the attached form with the analysis of patient 2027 and forwarding it to the personal email account of UAV pilot Captain Shane McInnes. No signs of infection detected. The body of Amy's email was concise and to the point. Read this. The boy you shot was not a zombie. The people inside the quarantine are not infected. They are people. They are American citizens. You have been lied to. There were a million things that could go wrong with this. It could wind up in his spam folder. He might not even check his email in the morning before going on duty. He might dismiss it as a hoax. But she couldn't think of where else to go with it. Alright, what next? After the drones, the other layer of security around the fence was the unmanned gun things. Amy brought up the bank of video screens, which she had figured out were feeds from those guns. Still a whole lot of nothing going on outside the fence. A series of static scenes tinged night vision green. She spent the next half hour poking around, trying to figure out how the guns worked. They were called Gladiators, long name, Gladiator Tactical Unmanned Ground Vehicles, or TUGVs. They had diesel engines that both turned the wheels when they needed to move, and charged onboard generators to keep themselves powered up. Just as with the aerial drone, she hit a brick wall when she tried to find an application that would let her actually control one of them. That was too bad, because she had this fantasy about taking one over and just rolling it along the fence, going on a robotic shooting spree and taking out all the others. But, again, she wasn't thinking. Those machines were military. The room she was in was Reaper, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not figure out who was operating them. She was getting frustrated at this point, but she knew that wouldn't help. This was a system, one set up by people, and it had flaws. What was the flaw here? Diesel. The Gladiators, or TUGVs or whatever, needed fuel, and that meant they needed people to refuel them. Even if the human operators were on a base in Japan, the refueling job had to be done by people here, on the ground, operating out of this very building, which meant that there had to be some mechanism by which they could disarm the guns so they wouldn't get shot when they approached them with gas cans. She just needed to find it. And she would. From the room behind her came the sound of metal scraping against floor. Something was pushing the vending machine out of the way. Amy sprang to her feet. She couldn't panic. She had a door on the opposite side of the room she could unlock and run through. Where it led, she didn't know, but she would get there as fast as her feet could carry her. Molly ran over and faced the door standing between them and the intruder. She let out a low growl. The scraping continued. When it stopped, what replaced it was the sound of something stepping over the vending machine. Then there was the crunching of glass, something stepping across the shards that had crashed out of the machine when Amy tipped it over. Amy ran for the opposite door, cranked open the deadbolt. Molly did not move from her spot. Amy was about to call to her when she heard, "Who's there?" A tiny voice. From the room the intruder had entered. It sounded like a little girl, and Amy had the crazy thought that Nevaeh McInnes had somehow teleported in from Nevada. The little voice said, "Can you unlock the door? Hello?" Amy cautiously made her way over and said, "Who's there?" The voice answered, but Amy couldn't hear. Then louder it said, "What's your name?" "My name is Amy. Are you lost, little girl?" "I'm not little. I'm 8. "Who's with you?" "It's just me. Can you let me in? I'm scared." Amy glanced back at Molly, who looked as skeptical as a dog can look. Amy unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. Hello? Who are you?" The little voice said, "Anna."